Good morning. Please rise in body or spirit to join in singing the opening hymn, number 403, Spirit of Truth, of Life, of Power. Good morning and happy Pride. Today is our annual Pride service. The various readings today will be presented by people that I'm privileged to work with because they are members of our Rainbow Welcoming Ministry. Donna Zimmerman will read our opening words.
The opening words today are from a speech by LGBTQ+ activist Susan Hyde. With one voice, as one people, as a single wave inevitably crashes onto the shore, we say to you that our time for freedom has arrived. We invoke the spirits of Mahatma Gandhi, Fannie Lou Hamer, Martin Luther King Jr., and Barbara Deming, all of who devoted their lives to freedom and justice. We call on them to guide us, to walk with us, and to join our one voice as we say, we won't give up. We won't shut up. We won't go away. And we will change the world.
Welcome. Welcome. Whatever path has brought you here, we are happy to see you. My name is Elizabeth DeCoux, and it's my privilege to serve as your worship leader today. If you are new to this church or to our faith, you will find that we ask you to know us not by our creeds, but by our deeds. I especially want to welcome any first-time or returning guests who are here today. Be sure to stop by our welcome table back there by the entrance and pick up some information about our church and our denomination. You can sign in as a guest and get a name tag so we can get to know you by name. If you are interested in finding out more about our church, our membership chair, Julie Smithers, will be happy to talk with you about the path to membership. She can also tell you about the classes we offer called Learn About Us classes. If you have questions, here's what to do. You'll probably notice that almost everyone is wearing a name tag. If you have a question, find somebody whose name tag has a yellow sticker on it that says, "New, ask me." That person will be glad to answer any questions that you have. If you are ready to jump in and help out, we're always looking for volunteers, and you will find sign-up sheets on the back table. We cordially invite our guests, along with members of the congregation, to join us in the back for refreshment and fellowship after the service. I hope to see you there. At this time, I have a request that everyone please silence their electronic devices. As we come together today to celebrate Pride, we do so in a difficult time and in a difficult place. A time and place when LGBTQ+ people are subject to discrimination not only from private parties, but also from the state government that is supposed to protect our rights. At such a time as this, in such a place as Florida, this congregation says to each of you, all of who you are is holy, and all of who you are is welcome here. RWM member Lee Plumb will please come forward to speak the words for our chalice lighting.
As Elizabeth lights our chalice on this Pride Sunday, in a state currently under a travel advisory issued by the Human Rights Campaign, please hear these words by Gordon B. McKeeman. Let there be light. Let it shine in dark places, in moments of pain, in moments of grief, in the darkness of hatred, violence, oppression, where there is discouragement and despair, wherever darkness is to be put to flight, let there be light.
Members of the Rainbow Welcoming Ministry and others in the congregation have created a sacred cloth that belongs to all of us. I'm referring to our church's memorial quilt. Cindi Jorgenson and Donna Zimmerman will now please bring forward our memorial quilt. Thank you, Donna and Cindi. This quilt currently has 12 squares. Some squares were created very simply by gluing decorative items to the cloth. Others were created with skill, using embroidery or cross stitch or some other special ability. Each square honors the memory of someone special. Some squares represent a friend or loved one of the person who decorated the square, perhaps someone who died from AIDS. Other squares represent deceased LGBTQ+ people and their allies who have played a part in the history of Unitarian Universalism. Lee Plumb and Cindi Jorgenson took all 12 squares and put them together in what you see here this morning. And this is a living quilt. If you have someone whose memory you would like to honor, please speak to me and we can get you the materials and the instructions to create whatever square you would like, which we can then add to the quilt. Just let me know. Thank you, Sydney. Lynn Wadley plays a special part in the wonderful music we enjoy at BBUUC. Today, we are fortunate to have her as our member musician. Welcome, Lynn.
Thank you. Well, on this beautiful day, in a beautiful season, many people will be spending some of their time in their garden, I know, and getting a great deal of pleasure, not to mention, hopefully, some food out of it. So, it happens that a lady that I know, Kathleen Hannon, had a special happening when she was in her garden, and this song tells about it. It has a nice chorus, and you can sing along as you will or as you can, or you just listen. They say that life's not easy, and sometimes love won't last. Well, I've tried to find some answers as the years go rolling past. And it was late last Friday afternoon that I was down on my hands and my knees. I found the truth temporarily in the garden, picking peas. Here comes that chorus. In the garden, picking peas, by the 2s and 4s and 3s. I found a sign of the grand design in the tendrils and in the leaves. Let's steam some up for dinner. There'll be plenty left to freeze. Meanwhile, I found peace of mind in the garden, picking peas. Well, it's hard to explain what happened. As I crawled along that day, mosquitoes were buzzing around my head and stinging nettles were getting in my way. And I wasn't really thinking about all that much when it was suddenly clear to me that hanging there was sweet, sweet truth in the garden, picking peas. Okay, now I think you can help me a little bit. In the garden, picking peas, by the 2s and 4s and 3s. I found a sign of the grand design in the tendrils and in the leaves. Let's steam some up, let's steam some up for dinner. There'll be plenty left to freeze. Meanwhile, I found peace of mind in the garden, picking peas. Well, I guess that truth isn't permanent, and visions can fade away. 'Cause where I once found meaning, I only find peace there today. But I am keeping my eyes wide open, and I'm trying to be aware. 'Cause pretty soon the watermelon's getting ripe, and I know there'll be some answers there. Or where? Or in the garden, picking peas. How many? 2s and 4s and 3s. What do we find? I found a sign of the grand design in the tendrils and in the leaves. Let's steam some up for dinner. There'll be plenty left to freeze. Thanks. Meanwhile, I found peace of mind in the garden where I was picking peas.
Thank you, Lynn. Please remain seated and join me in reciting our Congregational Covenant, which you will find in the order of service. We covenant to engage one another with honesty, kindness, and respect, to value diversity, seek understanding of our differences, and practice gracious accountability with care, love, and empathy. We make these promises to those who are here and those yet to come, so that we may be a safe, welcoming, and beloved community of acceptance, learning, and transformation. Please rise in body or spirit to sing our call to worship, which you will find in the order of service. RWM member Madeline Sims is here to tell us why Pride is celebrated in June.
Have you ever wondered why Pride is in June? It is to commemorate the 1969 uprising at the Stonewall Inn in Manhattan. At that time, it was illegal in New York to appear in public disguised by unnatural attire. Police routinely relied on this law to raid bars where lesbians, gays, and trans people gathered. But this time was different. Maybe it was the death of gay icon Judy Garland a few days earlier. Maybe it was a cynical political motive of the New York mayor who ordered the raid that night. But for whatever reason, on June 28th, the patrons fought back. They fought back for 6 days and nights. And while they were fighting back at the Stonewall, activists in other parts of the city were organizing. And 1 year later, thousands of people marched in the streets of New York in America's first gay pride parade and protest. The rest is history. Happy Pride. Thank you so much, Lynn.
Nothing we do here today is more important to our spiritual well-being than the offering we give. Whether you donate electronically or put a gift in the plate as it passes, we are grateful. Your generosity brings our values to life because your gifts support the programs of this church and they sustain the beauty and usability of our building and grounds. However you choose to give, we ask that you participate in this physical ritual by taking the plate when it comes to you and passing it on to your neighbor. Our offertory ushers, John Wrightington and Marilyn Jones, will please come forward. When they have finished passing the plate, please rise in body or spirit to sing our offertory hymn, number 123, Spirit of Life. Manny Andrade is a beloved member of this church and an accomplished leader in Jacksonville. He is the recipient of a Rainbow Award for Outstanding Achievement in the LGBTQ+ community. Many people living with or otherwise affected by HIV/AIDS find their burdens lighter because of Manny's work for the Northeast Florida AIDS Network. We're honored that he's here to give the sermon this Pride Sunday. Welcome home, Manny. The pulpit is yours.
It is indeed wonderful to be home and to see your faces and share this very special day with you. Now, LGBT Pride was not just born from a need to celebrate the LGBT community. Pride is the affirmation of our right to exist without persecution. So for persons who've ever wondered, and I've been asked this question, why don't we have straight pride? Please be thankful you don't need one. This morning, we're going to examine the impact of a heteronormative majority on sexual minorities. We will explore the evolution of the modern LGBT civil rights movement, and there are going to be some surprises. In the roaring 20s after the end of World War I, people clung to the notion that the world was finished with all wars forever. World War I, after all, was the war to end all wars. As a result, the idea that wars were forever banished sparked a shift in attitudes. That shift unleashed thoughts and ideas that challenged the status quo. Perhaps after 4 years of brutal combat and 9 million dead, people needed hope and a fresh start. The 20s did roar. By then, women had discarded oppressive garments like the corset. The age of the flapper had arrived, and some women were now experiencing a newfound sense of autonomy. However, the patriarch still had a firm grip on society. In doing my research, I came across a photograph from that period that at first made me laugh. It depicts Washington police officer Bill Norton of the bathing suit patrol, measuring the distance between the knee and the swimsuit on women, ensuring that the distance was at least 6 inches. As I read, I found out that if a woman did not meet the standard, a warrant for arrest could be issued. And that's not so funny. The then superintendent of public buildings and grounds in Washington had issued an order that bathing suits on women not to be over the 6 inches above the knee so young women would stay decent. We are examining a time of change and contradictions. LGBT folks at that time gathered in clandestine bars in major U.S. cities. Universally, to enter an LGBT-identified establishment, you needed a special password or a coded knock or a message to enter the premises. The ducks fly south, something ridiculous. But there were codes that would only allow people in if they met that standard. On top of everything else, these places were not legal and were also vulnerable to police raids. If people were arrested, your name was published in the newspaper and your life was ruined because you were shunned by society, and of course, you were most likely were going to lose your job. Often, bribes to corrupt police officials kept the peace, but that was only if you kept up the payments. Now, can you imagine an LGBT person trying to address their spiritual life in a community? Your sacred space under those circumstances is a bar. And there's nothing wrong with bars, but are you going to be fed spiritually there? I wonder. I can only imagine the damage living like this had on the self-esteem of LGBT individuals in the community. That's why places like BBUUC are sacred and offer us an opportunity to find the sacredness inside us. And for that, I am so grateful. Now we're going to post-war World War I Germany, in particular Berlin, which was a beacon for artists, poets, and yes, the LGBT community. During that time, paragraph 175 of the German Penal Code was not duly enforced. That is the infamous anti-sodomy law that was not repealed till 1974. LGBT people, mostly from other parts of Germany and from Europe, flocked to Berlin to experience an affirming version of life and a more open society. Many of the oppressive restrictions felt in other places were dismissed in Berlin. Perhaps you have seen Cabaret, a 1972 Oscar-winning film based on the book by The Berlin Stories by Christopher Isherwood. If you have seen the film or read the book, you have a good sense of what that era was like. Pre-Nazi Weimar Germany by the 1930s is a socially thriving society with rising sexual tolerance. The strong influence of the Wilhelmine period, which is about 50 years from 1871 to 1918, established the German legacy of idealism and romanticism. The ethos of that romantic period was the idea that individuals can attain the freedom to make their own laws in defiance of society. So for 50 years before this post-war period in Germany, there was a discussion throughout this country that talked about unjust laws and injustice. So the ground was already set for what was coming. For the LGBT community living in Germany, and it wasn't just Berlin, it was the major cities, but Berlin was the epicenter. Facing unjust laws like this and talking about change was like a healing salve. That's why people came to Berlin. So there's more history there, which I find fascinating. So let's go to the very beginning where all this freedom started, where this movement started. We'll go to Munich in 1867. There, a 42-year-old lawyer named Karl Heinrich Ulrich went before a Congress of 500 distinguished legal figures to repeal the laws forbidding sex between men. And he had also recently come out to his family, 1867. When Ulrich started his presentation, pandemonium broke out, and he was forced off the stage. Later, Ulrich wrote in a pamphlet that he distributed titled Raging Sword, "I am proud that I found the courage to thrust the first lance into the flank of the hydra of public content." His faith in himself and in who he was so strong that in spite of the defeat, he continued to work. In 1896, the self-owning, talk about grounded, self-owning, was the first gay magazine in the world. It began its first publication. In 1904, Theo Anna Sprungli spoke to the Scientific Humanitarian Committee on the subject of homosexuality in the women's movement. She inaugurated a parallel movement of lesbian activism. Sex between women was never specifically prohibited by Article 175 because in some people's mind, women and sex, it makes no sense, right? It only applied to men. However, lesbians found it no easier to live an open life. Using the alias of Anna Rühling, Sprungli proposed that gay rights and feminist movements aid each other reciprocally. And I quote, "At stake in both struggles were freedom, equality, and self-determination. Of course, intersection." In Robert Ricci's book, Gay Berlin, Birthplace of the Modern Identity, the general theme of the book is, of course, same-sex love is as old as love itself. Whoopi Goldberg in her Broadway show was playing a character, and she was talking about gay people. And one of the things that I remember, which I found amusing, was, gay people have been around since God. Yes, Whoopi, I think you got that one right. The general theme of the book of Gay Berlin is, in addition to same-sex love, is that the public discourse around it, the political movement to win rights for LGBT people, arose in Germany in the late 19th and early 20th century, as we've seen. In 1897, the physician Dr. Magnus Hirschfeld founded the Scientific Humanitarian Committee, the first LGBT rights organization. In the early 20th century, through his work, a canon of LGBT literature had emerged. The methodology used by Hirschfeld's studies has been questioned by modern social scientists, but give the guy a break. I mean, he was starting this whole thing. However, his knowledge of human sexuality was vast. He went beyond Freud's theory, which is now, of course, universally debunked and repudiated, that Freud posed that homosexuality can be cured through therapy. Yeah, right. Hirschfeld scoffed at that idea, and his work achieved an unparalleled understanding of the intricate reality of human sexuality. He posed the theory that male and female are abstractions. You know, all the discussion around gender that we have today, 1920s, that had started. He once calculated over 43,000 calculations of sexual characteristics. Hirschfeld was on the right track and way ahead of his time. He is considered by many the most influential sexologist of the 20th century. And what grieves me is this history is hidden. Nobody talks about the things that happened, and I'm really glad that we're doing that today. In the golden days of the Weimar Republic, the LGBT community experienced an unparalleled degree of visibility. In popular German culture, for the first time, films like, and my German really is awful, Mächten in Uniform, and Different from Others, presented the first LGBT leading characters in popular cinema. That didn't happen in the US till the 80s in Making Love. And by the way, Dr. Hirschfeld played a role in the film as the wise sexologist. A good role for him. Dr. Hirschfeld was later called the Einstein of sex when his world tour brought him to the US. That's how he was built, because he answered questions about sexuality in a way that had never been spoken to as openly and as frankly and as clearly. In 1927, Königliche Oper, again, I think that's how it's pronounced, presented a review called Strictly Forbidden, which offensively depicted and mocked gay men. A demonstration was staged in front of the theater that forced the offending skit to be removed from the program. 1927. Well, and throughout Dr. Hirschfeld's career, there were groups of disgruntled people, extremists involved in the gay movement, and notice I didn't say LGBT, I said the gay movement, who saw acceptance of the entire LGBT community in Dr. Hirschfeld's program as threatening and started brutally harassing him. They referred to his work as a freak show. Dr. Hirschfeld was also targeted by Nazis for being Jewish and gay. He was seriously beaten in 1920 by thugs, and in 1933 his institute was sacked, and the most comprehensive collection of books on human sexuality was destroyed by Nazis. At this time, a dissident group led by a man called Adolf Brande, his group had been infiltrated by Nazi-leaning members. This brought on personal attacks on Dr. Hirschfeld, including the unleashing of crude anti-Semitic remarks. One of the Nazi-leaning men in this group, and who was involved in the abuse, was later partnered with Ernest Röhm. If you've studied World War II history, he was the commander of Hitler's brown shirts. By this time, the magnificent library was sacked and burned. But Hirschfeld had long since left Germany for a world-speaking tour. He never returned to Germany. He was forced to live in exile in France, and he died at the age of 67 in 1935, so he never experienced or saw the horrors of the Holocaust. Now, his legacy today lives in an interesting link. In 1935 in Chicago, Henry Gerber, an immigrant from Germany, started the short-lived Society for Human Rights, modeled on Dr. Hirschfeld's Institute in Germany. Today, the Human Rights Campaign is a powerhouse in fighting for contemporary LGBT rights and also echoes the legacy of that name. So, given all this information, how do we define LGBT pride? The entire LGBT community and our allies are supported by the legacy of those 19th and 20th century pioneers. We are proudly supported by Karl Ulrich and his fierce determination to start a dialogue, even though he faced abuse and he was eventually exiled from Germany. He opened the first door for the LGBT movement everywhere. He was the first LGBT activist. We are proudly supported by Dr. Hirschfeld's legacy of inclusion. His extensive investigations using scientific methodology to increase the understanding of human sexuality exists even today. His work continues. We're proudly supported by Anna Sprungli, an early lesbian activist who underscored the importance of intersectionality of the LGBT and women's rights movement. Today, when we hear politicians here in Florida and elsewhere crudely scapegoat the LGBT community for their own political expedience, I stand firm on the proud legacy of our first LGBT rights pioneers who faced destructive forces head on. Their resilience inspires us to also face head on those very same forces. Amen.
Thank you so much, Manny. Please rise in body or spirit to join in singing all verses of our closing hymn, number 287, Faith of the Larger Liberty. Please remain standing afterward as Cindi Jorgenson comes forward to say our closing words.
As Elizabeth extinguishes our chalice, please hear these words of Maddie Sims. We extinguish this flame, but we keep its light in our hearts with this message of love and justice, taking it outside these walls to the world we live in until we are together again. Please go now in peace and justice and love to serve others. Amen.